Well, thank you, Shana, and thanks everybody for being here as well. Very grateful to get to start talking about this publication that's been on our desks for a few years now. Very grateful to see my collaborators here again. We each have a few things we want to talk about, and so we'll go through a few short presentations by the four of us. Then we'll have some time for a Q&A at the end. But we're very happy to celebrate this publication. And it's actually tied to a larger project, and Emily will say a bit more about that in a minute. But I'll show you another part of this project here that we have. So before we get to this book proper, it's one that we put out a few months ago. And I'll just show it to you right here. Being together. And some of you might recall that a couple summers ago, we had a series of talks through Zoom where we, instead of simply sending out land acknowledgement into the void, we thought we would question what that means and talk about what acknowledging the land means and different ways of acknowledging the land. So the result is this online resource. At the moment, it has our introduction and conclusion where we talk about what land acknowledgements have been, what they mean, and what they might be. And so you see that here as a conclusion and as an introduction. And we have 3 chapters. We'll have a fourth that we'll be able to add in a few months. Unfortunately, one of our collaborators passed away, and so in keeping with Cree protocol, we are not going to name this person or show images. But once that 1 year has passed, we'll be able to add to this. And what you see here is basically a long iteration of what it means to say that we are gathered on Treaty 4 territory, what it means to say that we are on the land of the Nehiawak, the Anishinaabeg, the Nakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis. And so we have non-Indigenous and Indigenous collaborators here who are from the land around Regina or have been living here for a long time, or who are guests, and who have gone through different aspects of this to the land. And it was important to us to put this as a resource for everyone. So you're all welcome to use it. We'll talk about it in a minute, but it's open access as well. You can either watch the recordings, the video recordings, or read the transcripts to access the same information. Because we like to be thorough as well, you'll see this wonderful cover by David Garneau. And I sat down with him and we actually discussed the land some more around this beautiful artwork too. So the whole project is really based around studying settler colonialism in Canada. This part of it was meant as an introduction to everyone who gathered either virtually or in person in Regina. So anyone who comes to Regina or rents here can go to this resource and learn about the land and take part in what we hope will remain a living land acknowledgement that involves all kinds of responsibilities and accountabilities. And there's already a link in the chat if you want to check that out. Now I'll turn it over to Emily. I'll share my screen in a minute again, but you can maybe just see her first. And we'll get to look at the reason why we are gathered here today.
Great. Thank you so much, Jérôme. So I want to introduce to you the book that we are here to celebrate, Canadian Settler Colonialism, Reliving the Past, Opening New Paths. And I'll introduce the book, and then I'm so excited that we have 2 contributors here to also speak to their experience and the content that they put into this book. Now, importantly, we wanted to create this collection because settler colonialism is a growing term being used throughout Canada and elsewhere. It's become a bit of a buzz term, a trendy concept. But we also saw that there was a bit of a gap in the scholarship of what this meant to Canada. And we also saw a gap in introductory and accessible content. And so we're hoping that this book fills some of that gap. Importantly, the collection brings together various perspectives on what settler colonialism is in Canada. Now, we start off this book with an introduction and we define for the audience, what do we mean by settler colonialism? And to us, this indicates an ongoing colonial relationship of the Canadian government and society. Importantly, we understand that Canada as an ex-colony is continuously colonial. This continuation of colonialism shapes an ongoing project of Indigenous peoples' dispossession for settler benefit. Now, there's no end date to colonialism. We must address the current context of the colonial Canada and look to the future. And so this includes our current era of reconciliation and decolonization. And within this current settler colonial present, all of our different collection contributors animate this from various perspectives. So you can see here that Jérôme is showing you our table of contents, and there's so many different themes included here. This includes Indigenous identity, education, missionaries, immigration, incarceration and policing, restorative justice, white supremacy, monarchical representation, and disability. Now, we'll hear from some of the content contributors in a bit, but I want to tell you a bit about the process that went into this. So importantly, if we go back to 2022, working with Jérôme and our colleague, Dr. David McDonald at Guelph University, we were able to get a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council Connection Grant in the spring of 2022. And so we used this grant to hire 2 graduate students to work with Jérôme and I as co-editors for this book. And so Ibukun-Fasunhan is here joining us today, and he's a PhD student in media arts and performance here at the University of Regina, just about to defend his comprehensive exams. We're very proud. And we also hired Alyssa Parker, who is a master's student at La Cité here at the University of Regina. And so together, Jérôme, Ibukun, Alyssa, and myself got together and we wrote a call for abstracts. And the call was geared towards graduate students. We wanted to put together this collection of graduate student voice. And so in the summer of 2022, we screened our applicants and we selected a diverse range of contributors. We then matched all of these contributors with senior scholars who were working on our larger SSHRC project. And so these students and senior scholars worked together in this mentorship-mentoree relationship to develop papers that were then presented at a fall 2022 graduate student symposium that we held through the University of Regina. It was held virtually that October. And so here at this symposium, the students were able to present their draft chapters that they had been working with their mentors. It was a closed audience, so it was other graduate students, it was the other mentors who were part of the bigger SSHRC project, and then of course the 4 collection editors. And so we brainstormed and provided constructive and supportive feedback to the different presentations. And the hope was really just to deepen the scholarship in terms of what was presented. Also, I want to tie this back to the resource that Jérôme introduced to us, the Being Together, the Living Land Acknowledgement. Before we had this virtual symposium, we asked everyone to watch the videos that we had put together as sort of a way to reanimate and dismantle a static territorial acknowledgement. We wanted them to really be fully immersed in the treaty for territory and understand the differing perspectives of Indigenous peoples and nations around settler colonialism here in Treaty 4. So the students then went away after that symposium and wrote their chapters, and the 4 editors went to work in terms of peer reviewing these chapters. So it was a rotating process where Jérôme and I took first and second read, and then we handed them over to Ibukun and Alyssa for third and fourth read. So it was a really robust peer review process, but also really important to this process was that Ibukun and Alyssa were also being mentored in terms of what are the standards of peer reviewing and editing this kind of scholarship. Once the articles were complete and submitted to us for this book, all of the students who participated received a $500 bursary for their participation. Now, our symposium and the table of contents followed 4 sort of general umbrella themes. We started with the origins and genesis of settler colonialism. From there, we moved on to disappearances, erasures, and confinements. From there, we moved to contemporary figures. And then our final section, to begin undoing colonialism, speaks to how we are just at the early stages of what will be an ongoing process of untangling and decolonizing the Canadian settler colonial present. Now, I want to turn it over to our contributors who are here with us today. So we'll start with Ibukun. Again, he was our co-editor on this project, and then we'll turn it over to Sherjan.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Emily. And well, she has said something that I wanted to say. So this is actually my second book that I'll be editing. You know, the first book was in Nigeria, and when this opportunity came, you know, it was like a dream come true. But then it was tough because you know, we edited the book for there were 4 phases of editing, and it took us more than a year to edit the book. You know, the first phase, you know, focused on some questions, you know, which include whether the book and whether the chapter, made sense for the public, you know, in terms of the treatment of settler colonialism and the area of the scholar. And we were again concerned about, you know, the use of complex English because we wanted the book to be very accessible, because that's one of the problems that, you know, the town and gown, you know, happens to be facing, you know, because the people in the community find academic work very difficult to read. And the treatment of settler colonialism, I would say, in the editing process was so strict that we ensured that even when a paper discussed, let's say, race, you know, and it's sort of generalizing, you know, going to Black race and other race, you know, it was sort of restricted in a way that it's to the thesis argument, you know, ensuring that the contributors were not very enough areas that wasn't the concern in their thesis. And I particularly love one paper, especially like Motlock's paper on abolition as a tool for decolonization, because, you know, it made me think about, you know, my positionality as a Black person in living in Canada and the problems Black people and Indigenous people are facing in the country. And it also allowed me to contribute my voice as a Black person, because I discovered that there have been many misrepresentations, let's say, of Africa, you know, and Africans, and you know, I was sort of in that position to say that, okay, no, this is wrong, you know, this is not right about, or this is really good, I love it. And I want to thank Professor Emily and Professor Jérôme also, because their edits, you know, made me go back to the drawing board. I had to read some books, to actually know where they're coming from, and it was so deep. And we're also asking questions about whether the paper made sense within their project, and if it also makes sense with our project. And another one was if the argument made sense, and the general view of the paper. And the after everybody edited the paper, we moved to the second round, which focused on checking the edit, the linguistic revision and formatting. And the third round focused on copy editing. Yeah. Um, well, although the process took more than a year, it was indeed a fulfilling one. And I would say that any that the book is an insight into the past, especially for non-Indigenous people, who are curious about learning the history of Canada. And I think who are serious about decolonization and efforts towards truth and reconciliation, because I can see lots of people out there paying lip service, to these issues, and it's a book that sort of focuses the minds of people out there to what is important, and what we need to start thinking of, opening new paths, sort of. And I also like to thank Alyssa, for tracking the editing, because at some point it became so difficult to track, and she was putting us into check about, okay, you've done this, okay, this one has not been done. And yeah, so I think that's that. I'll pass it on to Shejan, I think.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ibukun. Hello, everyone. I'm Sherjan May Banting, a racialized migrant settler on Treaty 4 territory. I am one of the graduate student contributors of the book. And of course, it is with great enthusiasm and privilege to be asked by the editors to briefly share my experience with regards to the process leading to the publication of my chapter contribution. My participation started in summer 2022 during a call for graduate student symposium. It was held in October of the same year. This edited collection, which took exactly 2 years before its publication, is a result from that symposium. So the delay, perhaps unintentional, was for good reason, or at least for me as a contributor, and maybe for some others. You see, as a graduate student, I only not do academic work. Well, of course, it is very important. I'm almost always getting caught up with practicalities and necessities of life, work, family, and the whole 9 yards. It would have not been possible for me to publish my contribution had it not been for the great care rendered by the editorial team, Doctors Jérôme and Emily, with assistance of the graduate students Ibukun and Alyssa. They spoke openly about this caring gesture and accommodation in their introduction. They're very patient with my thoughts and ever diligent, yet very critical in editing my writing. I appreciate the whole process, the peer review, which to my understanding is actually a critique of a positivist notion of peer review. Allow me to quote the editors somewhere here. This peer review process thus did not rest on the illusion of detachment and objectivity that comes with the double anonymized reviews. Open parenthesis, the term double-blind, being ableist, and given the most often papers are read, metaphorically inept. Close parenthesis. Instead, it relied on bringing people into a relationship through mutual agreement, obligation, and care. Unquote. The last sentence is the most important, at least for my part. If in academia you find people like this, let alone being editors, stick with them. I did. You'll find your importance as a writer, as a student, academic, in taking care of you, firstly, as a person more than a contributor. In other words, as for my experience, it somehow humanizes my experience the way I write. If you may, the process sees me as a writer rather than the armchair, if you know what I mean. So what was then the process? One, my paper actually was a proposal for the symposium that was being accepted then, was concurrently is part and parcel of my master's thesis in social work, under the supervision of Dr. Fritz Pino, with few delineations to give emphasis and capture the project's objective. It was being approved to participate in the symposium. I was then matched with a senior scholar. I think it has been alluded what was the process. So the senior scholar that was matched with me was a mentor, Dr. Rita Kaur-Damoon from the University of Victoria. So prior to the symposium, we had a critical correspondence, and her valuable feedback in way back then reshaping my ideas led to considerably a draft for the paper that was being presented during the symposium. So in my case, this mentorship model was the second peer review process. 3, during the symposium presentation, comments and mutual feedback from the audience. I see some folks here that are familiar that were there, and organizers alike were also reasons that further sharpened the arguments of my paper, put it that way. And lastly, and most importantly, the review and rigorous peer editing process from the editors made this paper as it is now in publication. So with that, I'd like to express my gratitude, if I haven't said it enough, to the editorial team. Tagang salamat, thank you, Doctors Jérôme and Emily, and Ibukun and Alyssa. And for the rest of us, I hope you'll find merit in reading this edited compilation. Again, thank you so much.
Well, thank you all for sharing about the process. I think for me it was really a great part of my life for those 2 years. But before that too, as Emily and David and I had discussed the project beforehand. I'm going to turn to some of the, not technical, but some of the aspects around the publication. It is Open Access Week, and you can all go to your reactions and find a little celebration thing to say, so to celebrate, because we're celebrating open access. Just talking about this process too, because that's not usually how things work out. I'm actually checking who's listening right now. So Kate wins the race. We chose to go the open access route as opposed to going through other publication avenues. First of all, because of the access that it gives everyone to this work. We are aligned not only in practice, but as far as our values go with Shuruk, which asks and now will require that everything that is financed through should be available by the public. But it's one thing to have a kind of open or a book that can be read. It's not the same thing as a book that will be read. And so think about the structure of the book. Think about how easy it is to find, how easy it is to actually access, was a big part of why we thought open access would be a way to go. Another reason for this is to avoid the logic of profit that drives academic publishing. Now in Canada, because Shuruk drives so much of the publishing in general, things are a little bit better. But we know that most journals and most academic publications do not pay contributors at all, or very little. Once you start selling a whole bunch of copies, you might get a bit of money. But they do make astronomical profits for a handful of multinational corporations. And here I'll get to Indigenous intellectual property, but that seemed particularly callous to us to make that happen. And when it comes to university presses, we know that things can be lengthy. And so we wanted to have different ways of approaching this these contents. Really, the Open Electronic Resource Program allows for a different kind of collective work than what we usually find in academia. It makes it possible to share what we're putting out there, but also approach the publication differently than the kind of calendars, the kind of approaches, the kind of requirements that go along with traditional publishing. And to be honest, I was also really curious about the process, so I wanted to try it out. We saw with being together on the acknowledgements, we have the capacity of having a book that's both a series of videos and have transcripts as their own chapters. And so we wanted to leave this open for our contributors as well to have different kinds of contributions. We didn't end up using that possibly so much because there's also a learning curve to that. And that's not something that's taught, and it does end up being more work as we learned quickly on our side as well. One of the questions that Shauna had asked me earlier is, why did you go with a book and not with a journal issue? There's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is that journals have the same problems as with academic publishing in general. There's money attached to that, and it does not go to the contributors in any kind of way. Now, Amelia and I are paid as part of our jobs full-time to be doing research. That's not the case for student collaborators. So we wanted to have the chance to make sure that students got some compensation for what they were doing. And so that shaped our general approach to open access and to having a book rather than a journal. It gave us control, right? We can put this in the format that we want. We don't have to deal with journal editors, which I often do. I don't have a problem with that as a rule. But it was nice to be able to try different things and start thinking a bit more about decolonizing the kind of work that we do in the university. It gave us a lot of flexibility. And Sherjan really explained one of the issues around flexibility, why that's so important. We knew coming in that we have graduate students here, that in many cases, many of them would not be able to complete a chapter after a symposium. And so we wanted to give them the means to do that. The question for me with flexibility is often, who do we lose when we are not flexible? It took us 2 years, sure. We could have done it in less, sure. But we wouldn't have the same kind of quality that we have here. We wouldn't have the same diversity and variety of perspectives either. Let's be honest about this here. Indigenous, racialized, queer, disabled people in general, scholars in general, not only face the regular hardships that any one person might face at any time around illness, around just life being busy, mental health, the fact that we're still coming out of the isolation phase of the pandemic when we started all this. But there's also specific pressures beyond that, that mean that putting this work together just demands a lot of time and effort amongst a variety of other tasks that have to be completed too. We have several contributors who have children. Emily and I both do, and many of the others do as well, and that has a way of throwing a wrench into any plan because people get sick and children have needs and disasters and dramas happen. So this flexibility was really wonderful to be able to get to the point where we're at, and even with that, there are some students who couldn't continue from the symposium to the published form, and that's too bad. We're really disappointed that it couldn't work, but fully understanding that, of course, they were facing important barriers there. Having a book or a journal also gave us control over peer review, and my colleagues here have already talked about it very well. But I do have a critique of peer review in general. Of course, I can now have this because I'm a tenured, full professor. I can do a lot of different things, and nobody can really force me to publish in any kind of venue. That's different when it comes to students, obviously. But peer review, I've found in my time in academia, can be very violent. It can be downright mean or dismissive. And we want to avoid that. We do think that when people put something forward, generally there's something behind there. And that's where our initial screening went, right? Is there an idea there? Is that something that will lead somewhere promising based on what they're telling us? And no one has let us down on that level. We used a model of peer review that some have called formative peer review. The idea being that we don't expect texts to come in fully ready for publication. We do want to bring them up to that I don't want it to say to that standard, but have them be ready, right? So face several rounds of criticism, knowing that it's going to work out, knowing that we're all committed to this. And I think that makes a big difference. The kind of comments that you get on a revise and resubmit or on a rejection will mean something very different than, well, let's talk about this, like explain to me what you mean here. Can you tell us more, right? So can you be a bit clearer on this specific concept? Those kind of things. That will be a good reason to just reject an article in a journal when they have so many submissions, are then small details to be worked out here, really. And in disciplines where really white scholars are overrepresented, I think it's also important to take into account the fact that there's not only different experiences, but different cultures at play too. And so we were also careful to pair mentors and mentees so that the mentees could learn about academic life through all this. It's not just about the paper, it's about a lot more afterwards. And we wanted them to learn about the process because we had to do it the hard way. Yeah, so we'll leave it at that. The last question I want to look at here is why the license that we have. I'll just bring this up here. This is not a fully open. Fully open. So we have it as Creative Commons attribution. So anybody can look at it, share it, right? It's there. It's freely. It's basically free. Right? It's open access, and that's it. We can't actually have it be transformed and remixed. That's often the idea with many of the publications through the open textbook program. Now, we didn't do this, and there's a few reasons for that. One of them is Indigenous intellectual property. I don't know if Emily, we haven't prepared anything. I don't know if you have anything to say about Indigenous intellectual property. Just like raise your hand and I'll tag you in if you want to add anything on that. But the idea here is that with the Living Together, the Being Together book on the acknowledgements, and with some of the work here that does involve consultation with knowledge keepers, we didn't want this to go out there and just be changed and taken up in any kind of way. There's enough appropriation of Indigenous IP that we really didn't want to just say, yes, go ahead, do this. I think there's some issues around open access, open publishing, and Indigenous intellectual property that we haven't thought through entirely at this point. But I know people are doing this. And then we had a good talk that Chanel had arranged last year on this, or last semester, or maybe last month. I have no sense of time these days. The license also has to do with the fact that we have early career students, so they need their name on everything, right? We need them to be like really clearly cited, because that's going to make a big difference. That's the whole economy of citations, and they need to be in on that. We don't want people to just be able to lift their ideas and then take them up. um, make it really clear that we want people to cite them and quote them. It also leaves the book sort of as a whole rather than having it be taken apart. In many cases, that's a really good thing. Here, we really want to have voices that we bring together. Right? There is some resistance to this kind of work, even around settler colonialism. This is not Indigenous studies. Right? This is not what we're doing here. We're looking at settler colonialism as something that affects everyone who lives in a settler colonial context, and thinking about not just colonialism and colonization, but the recolonization of people who come to Canada from countries that had been previously colonized. The issues around racialization, which are different when it comes to Indigenous and non-Indigenous racialized peoples. We don't have a lot about Black Indigenous people or other mixed Indigenous people here. That's something that I hope we'll get to as well. But we did want to make sure that the perspective comes through, the voice comes through. And at the end, we have a lengthy About Our Contributors section that can show you very briefly, where we asked every person to introduce themselves and have a long enough biography. Hopefully people will hit them up and ask them to take part in different events. But we also wanted to make sure that we had these positionality statements, and you often find these within papers where, especially Indigenous and authors will explain what their links are to what they're studying. And so we want to make this clear here and easy for everybody to do and find. Because we do have voices, we do have people. These ideas are sort of new original content, and we didn't want it to get lost in something that's freer in terms of how we can use the information. We have more to learn about that. I'm very open in the future to having other kinds of projects with other kinds of licenses, things that can be reused. And we would look forward to any kind of conversation with Indigenous scholars around this question as well, because there's some great things that can be done on that level too. We just need to make sure that we do it ethically and responsibly. Emily, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add to any of this.
Sure, thank you. I would just add, you sort of mentioned looking forward, and I would mention to the audience, we've talked about, where do we go with this project? So importantly, when it comes to our being together, our living land acknowledgement, we always envisioned that we would sort of continue that conversation in some capacity. Of course, all of these projects perhaps take more time than we originally expect and intend, so we haven't yet added to that conversation, but the idea has always been that a land acknowledgement would continue to grow and change, and we would continue to build the narrative around that. And then also with the book, the edited collection, we've also talked about how we could perhaps continue to grow the volume or add another volume. And importantly, I would just come back to something that Jérôme mentioned. Some of the folks who came to our virtual symposium and presented papers didn't actually in the end complete those chapters for all of those reasons mentioned around responsibilities towards their graduate programs, responsibilities towards children or employers. And so there is sort of this body of work that we have done that's not part of this yet, and perhaps some of these folks come back to the project. We'll see, we hope. We'll continue to extend that invite as we go. I also just want to note that a number of the contributors are here in the audience. Folks who contributed chapters, folks who were faculty mentors. I want to thank you for coming and recognize all of the work that you did towards this project. And I also want to recognize that we have university leadership on this call and some of our wonderful colleagues. So I really appreciate you taking time out of your day. I know, we're missing our fourth editor simply because she is a full-time teacher as well as a master's student and, just doesn't have that kind of flexibility. And I know that even when we have flexibility, it's still, it takes quite a bit to carve out an hour for something like this. So I really appreciate the support and everyone coming out. I wonder, Jérôme, if we could open the floor for questions. Yeah?
Let's do it.
Okay. Is the process going to be putting questions in chat, raising hands?
Feel free to use either the chat, the Q&A, or your microphone.
Perfect.
I can't see a hand. Sorry, on my computer. I just wanted to say I really wanted to commend both of you on your approach to peer mentorship. I think that's in the real spirit of preparing people for further academic work in a really positive way. As an historian, as someone who experienced this in graduate school as well, I just wanted to say well done to both of you. I think it's tremendous. So my kudos to you, and I really enjoyed the session. Sorry for interrupting, but I just couldn't find my hand.
No, that's good, and thank you for the comment. It means a lot to us, and we detail the process in the introduction. So any faculty who want to do something similar and feel that we maybe went quickly or too lengthily over the process, the four of us came together, took the time to write out the process, and it's all explained and defended in there as well. So you're welcome to just borrow that and go ahead and use it for your own publications too.
Thank you, Dr. Cashin. Okay, well, why don't I'll moderate the screen if that makes sense. So next on my screen is Dr. Belisle, if you'd like to, or if you turned your camera on to ask a question, please go ahead.
I just turned it on in the spirit of, creating community. So I'm just here to listen. But congratulations on a great project. I'm really looking forward to reading it. And congratulations to the students too.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so we have a raised hand. Thomas, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, just thanks. It's a really inspiring publication. And I'm wondering how you envision different ways that this could be used in classrooms, or if there are particular protocols that you would also recommend in that.
I think for me, it's really meant to be used as it is like any resource. But it is open. There's no protocols, no need to ask anyone. The advantage of this kind of access is that there's no need to copy anything, to download anything. It's just right there. You can link directly to any one chapter. So I could see a course that uses the book as a whole, but because the different contributions come from different disciplines, they all work within settler colonial studies, but they all work within their own disciplines, whether it's criminology, social work, sociology, political science, history, philosophy, politics, history. Yeah, I already said history. I'll say history again. If anything works for one of your courses, please assign it as primary reading, as secondary reading. The idea being that everything comes from graduate students who are rarely recognized as the experts that they are. I mean, I've always thought we should give third, fourth year courses to grad students. They know one thing. They have one job. They're supposed to know one thing. And so they're really the experts on this brand new research, but it's been read by at least three faculty members who are experts on those topics too. So it's solid things, right? It's solid. It's dependable.
Yeah. So I think one thing is, if I do use it, I'll pass it on, mention to the contributors so that they can add that to their CVs. So.
That would be great. Absolutely. And it's always exciting, right? It just encourages people.
I would just add the Being Together Living Land acknowledgement also has been used in various ways. So of course we used it for this project. We built it and then we invited folks to a virtual symposium and asked them to watch this as sort of our way of hacking the land acknowledgement and making it a deeper, more authentic experience. And so some folks have asked us to come and instead of doing a land acknowledgement, speak to that process and speak to that deepening of a commitment to relationality with lands and with people. So just another way that they can be used. Thanks.
Something, if anybody here is in Regina and you're having a conference or bringing anybody over, any speakers or anybody who is newly hired, for instance, you can learn a lot about the land and relation to land and what our land acknowledgement can mean, because that's already a few years old, right? Things change. What matters is often how we come to learn about how we should acknowledge the land than the actual acknowledgement of it. So this is really a way to keep that going, to keep that learning going beyond the repetition that does keep it in our minds in the meantime.
I don't know, I was not here for part of the session, so forgive me, but I just want to emphasize, if you didn't, the eclectic nature of this book, and it was possible because you did it this way. You were saying that, because of the multiple topics that you're covering, book publishers don't look at it like that. And so it's pretty special, this book, and I congratulate all of the authors and the editors for this wonderful work. You're free to contact Jérôme and Emily, I'm sure, and they can connect you with anyone you need to talk to.
So. Where is it to find? If you want to talk about this some more, if you have colleagues who do, right, we're happy to do that. And but yeah, we welcome any questions or discussion. I guess it's the issue when we already have more of a discussion than just an academic presentation. Then we've already said a lot.